Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm a bit disheveled. I just returned from overseas. Um, uh, Still a bit jet lagged, so I want to speak a little bit today again about what's new under the sun, Lebanon. So I just returned recently from France, and I arrived at leaving CDG. I arrived fairly early. It was a 1:15 p.m. flight. I arrived by 9 o'clock. So I was checked in, sent out my luggage, etc. Had a few hours to kill. So naturally, I spent my last remaining euros on hazelnut chocolate, Côte d'Or, etc., and a book. So I bought Michel Onfray's um, L'Art d'être français. I devoured it, not all of it. I would say the first 100 pages during my wait at the terminal and during the flight. I took a break for about 2.5 hours watching the excellent in-flight new James Bond movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It was awesome, awesome. Um, and so, in flight reading as I do, slowly, methodically, taking copious notes. In my new Bic quatre couleurs, I bought a while in France, sort of reconnecting with my childhood. So I bought a Bic 4 colors. Reading in this matter, I must have seemed odd to one of the flight attendants who surprised me at one point and said, "My God," in French, you read so seriously, meaning, taking notes in the margins and so forth. So I told her I can't read otherwise. Um, so she then told me that that is how she actually reads, and that's why she sort of was was harassing me, and she said this is how her own grandmother read and how she taught her to read. So maybe, I don't know, I reminded her of her grandmother. um, at any rate, this is a method that she said she inherited from her grandmother. Regardless, the French read. They're reading folks. They read books, magazines, newspapers, names of metro stations. Um, my wife will like this. Uh, Montparnasse, bienvenue. Montparnasse, bienvenue. So anyway, you cannot go into a Fnac bookstore in France without, spending, half an hour waiting in line to pay for your purchases. So the French are reading folks. So in any case, so the flight attendant proceeds to tell me that she recently reread Saint-Exupéry's Terre des hommes, taking notes, and it was a whole different experience for her from when she'd read the book as a schoolgirl. So I told her that this was one of my favorite books, and I quoted to her from memory what is to me one of the most memorable citations from the book. And it's from the very beginning of the book, where Saint-Exupéry writes, "L'homme se découvre quand il se mesure à l'obstacle." Man or mankind discovers oneself when it measures itself against the obstacle, because the obstacle sort of pushes back on you. She didn't remember the quote, but she said that, that she liked it, and that she would read the book again. Um, and she later came back with a gift, and she gave me this little um, notebook, Petit Calepin. She said this is an Air France production, manufactured by Air France and sold by Air France, and the proceeds of which go towards the education of children in Burkina Faso, Brazil, and Romania. So I started writing immediately uh, in that notebook, as you can tell, uh, just notes on a current book I'm currently researching. But in any case, I continued reading and I continued writing in the margins of the book I was reading. And it got me into thinking of Bernard Lewis's The Political Map of the Middle East, which is a text that is required reading in all of my courses on the Middle East. So, uh, and this, reading au frais reminded me, made me think of Bernard Lewis. So, um, and it made me think of the French conception of history in the temps long, or in the longue durée, as the French would say. History as the daughter, the spawn of geography, a theme that is recurrent in the writings of many Lebanese intellectuals. So I jotted down a few notes to sort of add to my usual introductory lectures. Coming up next week. So I teach two courses this semester in the spring semester. One old course, States and Minorities in the Middle East, and another course, Edifying Books on the Arab-Israeli Conflict, for which I predict sparkles, fireworks perhaps, um, volcanoes of emotions. Uh, but this is to say that history does not care about our feelings. Our emotions mean zero to history. History is ultimately the outcome of human geology, a landscape chiseled by the hands of man, molded by human sweat and blood and tears. History is therefore a geology married to biology, a geography, a territory, a native soil, a terroir, to use the language of winemaking, a terroir and a terreau, a compost, a crucible of compost, if you will, with borders drawn by man and by nature. To use a quote from Michel Onfray, it's a seashore that dissolves dry land. It's a mountain range that breaks off the assaults of deserts and the rumbles of advancing armies. History is thick, impenetrable forests. History is raging rivers that inhibit crossings, constraining men to make a stand and a homestead on one bank or the other of the river. History is therefore the product of geology, geography. In the words of Michel Chiha, relative to Lebanon, history is the conjugation of mountain and sea. And where you don't have those two basic ingredients in the conjugation, you do not have a Lebanon. Michel Onfray sort of chimes in on this idea, noting that deserts do not spawn cultures that emanate from arable soil or jungles, and likewise, human characteristics and cultures chiseled in the harsh conditions of the frozen tundra or the blazing savanna are hardly reminiscent of what may be generated in deep valleys or in the ice caps. Um, Inuits, this is still Michel Onfray, Inuits do not share the values and the habits and the rituals or cultural accretions of sub Saharans, Muslims, or Europeans. Now, this is manifestly not a politically correct statement to make, but it is demonstrably a correct statement to make. Religions born in the desert are markedly different from religions bathed in the cultures of the Mediterranean or in the scenic Himalayas. History, in some, unlike social science, is not a matter of concepts and models and ideas and philosophies and visions emanating from the brains of theorists sitting at their desks. History is geography chiseled by the forces of nature and man or humans, if you prefer, constantly wrestling with nature. And again, this brings back where I started Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's quote from Terre des Hommes: L'homme se découvre quand il se mesure à l'obstacle. And so the history of Lebanon is the history of this man measuring himself against the obstacle. It is a history of the Phoenicians, preceded by ancestors who were primitive hunter gatherers before they became agriculturalists and sailors. The history of Lebanon is also the history of Judaism and Christianity and Hellenism and Rome and Islam and Europe. It's a multi-millennial adventure that was named Lebanon since biblical times. Um, may be very different from the Lebanon of today, but certainly it's a millennial experience, a millennial adventure, a millennial structure and foundation upon which the Lebanon of today was encrusted or built. When modern Lebanon emerged in 1920, it already could claim behind it 6,000 years of existence, 6,000 years of history. Among those 6,000 years, two solid millennia of Judeo Christian traditions, 2,000 years of Christendom. Without valorization of this history, without valorizing the Phoenicians and Judeo Christian roots of Lebanese history, history gets uh, falsified. Um, I'm going to stop here. I said too much. Cheers.